I think everyone's here probably seen some version variation of what the candidate experience is when taking the screener and what that looks like. So I'll still show a little bit of some of the enhancements we've made, but I'm really going to focus into the behind the scenes. How does it actually work? Like, how would I set that up? What's building it like? So really excited to share that we've made this really easy and intuitive. So if you've been using automation, it should feel pretty straightforward. The first example is when I come into a job-based automation, I'm going to have a new step type that's add questions to the job. Now I have one pre-built that I'll show because we can get pretty fancy with what we want to do. You're able to use all of the kind of customizations for list building that you can to trigger it. So you can do it based off of jobs of a certain specialty. I want to add questions based off of a certain, how long they've been open, all kinds of different options. When we do our ad screening step, we try to make it really easy where it's ready to go, but you can heavily customize it. So by default, we set that it's going to try to generate 3 questions based off of the job description. It's also going to create one kind of default pre-screening question. Our default is, can you tell me why you're interested in the role? And then it's going to have a post-screening question of, for the right opportunity, would you be willing to negotiate, for example, the salary? But all of this is completely customizable. You can delete these, you can add questions. You could, if you only want to manually define the questions, just set this to 0 and it'll just add whatever you had defaulted. Or you can remove these and say, you know what, the AI is going to do a great job of figuring out the questions that I want based off of the job description. So I'm going to let it create all those questions. Now, what's nice is we're also going to give you additional options on top of this. So you right now, by default, all of the questions will be generated based off of the published description, but you have the ability to change that based on fields, especially custom fields, since we know sometimes that's where people put their information. You can also then give the LLM additional instructions on how to create those questions. So I'll go back and I'll show kind of my more in-depth version of this. So for example, when I have the screening questions added, I'm telling it to create questions focused on experience and skills required to do the job. But it can also be, hey, this is an entry-level position, keep the questions light. So completely customizable. I saw some people have also asked, like, well, what if I want people to review the questions? I don't want them to just go out. Well, you totally have the option to set a field on the job record. So for example, here, every time it generates questions, I'm updating a field that I put as job screening question status to needs review, and I'm setting a notification to the job owner to review those questions. Yeah. As easy or as customizable as you want. Now, actually building the automation, it's going to look very similar. If you've ever built an engagement, we have a new engagement type that's going to be available to you either as a candidate-based or a submission-based, and that's going to be our screener engagement. It's going to work very similar to a chat. So if I do a submission-based engagement, I can add additional questions beforehand. So for example, if I want to do knockout questions, I can ask like, are you authorized to work in the United States? If they answer yes, move on to the screening portion. If they answer no, thank you for your time. We'll reach out if we have a better opportunity. And once again, lots of customization right at your fingertips. We're going to default it to try and make it easy. So we have a default statement of what it's going to look like. We give it a name, a voice, instructions, but you can customize all of this. And we also have advanced settings. So you can change the job description that it's going to display to the candidate. You can adjust the tone. Now, we do have some safety nets in place just to make sure that the tone doesn't get rude or insulting. So it's always going to be nice, but you can add a little bit more detail to it if you want. Adjust the welcome message, the prompts. You can also, during the screening, so it's going to ask them the questions that are generated on the job, but they'll also have an opportunity to do a Q&A. So if you want to give the LLM context when it answers questions that are asked to it, you can put them here. So for example, we see a lot of questions around like benefits or next steps in the process. Also, if you have that data in fields, you can just tell the LLM which field it's looking at in reference to that job in order to answer those kind of questions. So for example, I can say, look at the benefits field and provide answers based off that. We have even more settings. I know I've been going on. So on top of that, we have the option to include the job details in the chat. We have the option to add those responses to a note. We can send a notification every time the screener has been completed. And let's face it, we do not want to overwhelm our recruiters with too much noise. So we also have the option to say, I only want them to get notified if the screener was completed and the person got a really good score. So if a bunch of screenings had a terrible score of like, let's say 10, I'm not very interested in, those now won't go out, and I won't hammer people with no's for screeners that maybe those aren't our top interested candidates to go look at. So what some of this looks like too, though, so I'll show kind of the ATS. So for example, I have my job here where I had my screening questions created. So these are the screening questions that were asked on the job. And then we sent this to Mandy. And so we are able to see quite a few details. First off, we are going to see, so sorry, I'll go back one more step. We will see we have the submission that was used, and we have new fields now that I can use to kind of know more detail about how that screening went. So we've got our screening status complete. I can see the score, and then we have our screening summary as well. So with that, I'll kind of dive a little bit deeper. What our screening summary looks like, here we go. We're going to get a summary of how it went. We're going to see her score. Now we're also looking at skills. Now, this is probably not the best example. I've been doing a lot of testing, but what we're going to do is we are going to compare the skills that were picked up during the interview based off of the questions and answers. We'll try to compare them against the resume and highlight the ones that we noticed weren't in the resume. We'll also provide an analysis, some suggested areas of focus, and then we do provide the transcript. We provide both those kind of knockout questions if you configure any, so during the chat screening, and then the transcript for the voice screening as well. We also have the ability to see that on Mandy's record as a note as well, if we picked the option to have it created as a note. One of the cool things as well is it's not just based on submissions. So you might want to run a pre-screening on a candidate. What you can do is create essentially a fake job, a greenfield job, where you put in just kind of some basic questions, have it ask basic screening questions, give it kind of a general description of like, hey, this is just a pre-screening I do of every candidate that comes into the system. What you'll be able to do is to pick the job that it's going to screen against. So I'll give an example. So I can search for the job. We do support ATS ID, or you can just search by the name. We do include the ID though, because for example, we know that there can be multiple with the same name. So to make that nice and easy. So you can specify what the job is that the candidate's going to get screened against without even having a submission. What's nice about this is if the candidate completes the screening using the candidate-based engagement, we will then create the submission against that job record. So this is really nice for example, pre-screenings where I want to screen, let's say, all the candidates that apply, but I don't want to get inundated with submission records. Well, now I only have submission records for those that are a little bit more qualified because they actually took the screening. All right. Last part of this, let me go here, is we do have some really cool details on this now. So just kind of showing off what this does look like with a little bit of enhancement is you'll be able to put this on your job page, but in case maybe you don't have a job page listed, you'll have the option, and it's completely toggleable, to include the job details in the chat now. So now when I come to this job, I can see the job details right here in the chat screen as a candidate. And I know I'm not showing on mobile, but it is mobile friendly so that it will adjust if they're on mobile. And just for comparison, so it is going to be pulling up the job description with the formatting that you have here, since we know a lot of people take a lot of care with their formatting, or as Brittany showed earlier with the enrichment step, we are respecting that and presenting that as it's formatted.